Welcome to another episode of Cafetography. Today we're taking a look at the Canon 300mm f4L IS USM telephoto prime lens, a popular lens amongst nature and wildlife photographers as well as motorsport photographers, potentially one of the best telephoto lenses you can get for your money, offering a superb image and build quality at a reasonable price. Before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's take a look at the lens itself. At 1190 grams, it isn't actually as heavy as you might have imagined. In fact, it's actually quite light for its size. The metal body houses 15 glass elements in 11 groups and features a built-in retractable lens hood shrouding a 77mm thread for filters. The lens is mildly weather sealed, which means if it starts raining, you don't have to stop playing, but just don't leave it in any puddles. The lens has no rubber gaskets on the lens mount, but the buttons are dust and weather sealed, a little bit of a shame considering this is an L lens. At 300mm there is a lot of image compression when it comes to perspective. This means that you can get some impressive subject isolation even with the f4 aperture. Backgrounds will be out of focus with a nice smooth bokeh, whilst the subjects will be nice and sharp. Although the f4 maximum aperture may struggle to freeze action in low light, there is image stabilization. The image stabilization will give you 2 stops of compensation when shooting handheld. This won't help with moving subjects, but it will take out some of the camera shake when taking photos in low light or with slower shutter speeds. This picture was taken at 1/50th of a second, and you can see by looking close up at the dog's eyes that it is sharp. 1/50th of a second at 300mm isn't the easiest thing to manage, and without IS it will be very blurry. Admittedly though, I was actually seated for this shot, which aided with the stabilisation. Still, pretty impressive. To see how much an effect 2 stops of stabilisation can have, you need to shoot video. Here the IS helps to take out some of the camera shake as shown. There is a slight high-pitched noise when IS is activated, but it is hardly audible. Another thing to note is there's a slight clunk when autofocusing. This is typically at the beginning and end of focusing. Again, this is barely audible. Autofocus is incredibly fast and accurate. I use this lens mainly for motorsport where the subject can be approaching at speeds of over 100 miles an hour, and I have no problems maintaining focus when in AI servo mode. This car is coming towards me at 120 miles an hour, bouncing all over the place on bumpy tarmac. Tricky for a lens to focus, but here it managed just fine. Panning is a breeze with this lens. Faster shutter speeds obviously yield higher keeper rates, but this was shot at 1/20th of a second, and the lens had no problem keeping up. The blurring at the back of the car is due to the car rotating rather than any issue with the autofocus. This lens is also very sharp when shooting wide open, only improving when you stop down to f5.6 with good sharpness in the corners, even on a full frame camera like the 5D Mark III that we are testing it on. It renders colours beautifully with lovely contrast and the ability to pull out details without much sharpening, if any. You can see here how the lens resolves small details such as the feathers in these pictures. On the body there are 4 switches: autofocus on or off, a focus limiter, image stabilization on or off, and image stabilization mode 1 or 2. The focus limiter switches from 1.5 meters to infinity or 3 meters to infinity. In my experience I find that if you aren't focusing closer than 3 meters, then limiting the focus will gain you a slight improvement in performance of AF speed. The focus ring is nicely weighted and has about half a turn of throw from end to end. Full-time manual focus is available, although manual focusing with this much perspective compression is quite tricky. Image quality on this lens is probably its best feature. As we mentioned earlier, this lens is very sharp wide open, displaying almost no vignetting. There is a slight bit of chromatic aberration when shooting in very harsh light, but even then it is very well controlled. There is a slight bit of pincushion distortion, but that is easily fixed in post. Here we can see how the vignetting cleans up by stopping down to f5.6. You will note that the edge-to-edge sharpness is great wide open and only improves more as the lens is stopped down. The slight amount of vignetting that does appear wide open to my eye is rather pleasing. I tend to add a slight vignette to my images anyway. For wildlife, some might find this lens a little too short. A 1.4 times teleconverter will change this lens into a 420mm f5.6 lens, but you'll start to introduce things like chromatic aberration and distortion. You will also lose a stop of light, which may not be desirable, especially in low light. So shooting on a crop sensor camera might be the better option to get the user more into the bird range. However, if you can get close enough with this lens, you will not be left wanting. Utilising image stabilisation and good positioning, you will get great results. Overall, this lens is an obvious choice for shooting motorsport, wildlife or nature. The image quality is brilliant with sharp, contrasty images and well-controlled vignetting and chromatic aberration. The reach this lens provides makes it ideal for shooting motorsport, and if you shoot wide open you'll be able to drop the background out of focus. For wildlife and nature, this lens is sharp and accurate enough to bring out the detail in feathers and eyes. All in all, I cannot recommend this lens enough. It is brilliant at what it does and is light enough to carry around all day. It really is excellent value.